In the quiet tapestry of suburban life, a storm was brewing. James, a man of Scottish-Irish descent, found himself entangled in a web of deceit that threatened to dismantle his family and reputation. What seemed like a typical marriage, a picture-perfect facade, was about to be shattered by the revelation of an affair and a betrayal that would leave no stone unturned. Join us as we unravel the intricate threads of this domestic drama, where loyalty clashes with desire, and the stakes are higher than ever before. My full name is Alex Thompson. My heritage is a combination of Scottish and Irish. I consider myself educated and determined, with a strong work ethic and an unwavering sense of right and wrong. I don't accept nonsense. If my forefathers could talk from the dead, they'd tell you about the Scottish spirit, which is particularly obvious in Scotland's ongoing battle for independence today. My late father instilled in me a distaste for folly, and his lessons continue to resonate. My mother now lives in Arizona, loving the warmth away from the snow and rain of upstate New York. She lives with her sister, who is also widowed. We talk every week. My younger brother and older sister reside across the nation, both with their own families and busy lives. Now, let me explain my current predicament. A few months ago, I realized that Laura Gruner, my lovely wife of 9 years, had been associated with other men, yes, several times during the previous 4 years. She decided I wasn't enough for her, and her needs went beyond what I could supply. Rather than languishing, I sought information. I hired an investigator as my initial source and spent $2,500 to confirm my assumptions. It became apparent that my wife was having regular meetings with a man named Jason McDonald. They were intimate in hotels and residences. My wife was selling his apartment downtown in Albany, New York, state capital. The second source, a lawyer, provided details regarding my wife's affairs. I consulted with a family law expert, Leanne Miller, a friend. Yes, I understand, you receive what you paid for. She told me the truth. In a divorce, I end up losing money. You see, I have 2 children, Thomas is 7, and Rebecca is 5. In New York State, the court strongly favors granting custody to moms. It doesn't matter whether the mothers cheat, that detail is completely insignificant. New York judges strongly prefer to grant custody to mothers over fathers. For a man to obtain custody, the mother would almost have to be a serial killer or worse. The system is significantly slanted toward mothers. Fathers frequently receive the short end of the stick. The father's parenting talents are often overlooked in court. Judges would sooner give custody to a mother with a difficult past than a father who is a wealthy corporate lawyer. I'm the corporate lawyer. My wife is in desperate need, like a pill-obsessed 403, but you catch my drift. She runs a real estate agency that specializes in commercial and high-end residential properties. Don't get me wrong, I believe that most mothers are terrific at parenting children, but I believe that men who love their children are as capable. In this situation, they are also my children, so why shouldn't they be as qualified to raise them? Well, not according to New York State courts. To them, I am automatically tagged as a villain. My lawyer provided me with critical advice: do nothing. Yes, you heard that, do nothing. Because if I take action against my wife's adultery, I'll be the one who gets screwed. The judge screwed me in New York State family law, as well as the biased judicial system, have failed me. You know, public opinion and legal precedent suggest that in a divorce, my wife would most certainly clean me out. New York law allows her to cheat and still get the divorce. Now, I consider myself liberal-minded. I believe in justice and fairness, but no, the divorce rules in this state do not reflect those principles. They feel that victimized fathers should be further victimized. If you have a Johnson and are a father, you're in for a difficult time. You can probably tell by now how frustrated I am with New York's divorce rules and how unfair the entire scenario is. She can cheat and possibly be rewarded for it. That's American justice at its best. So, my well-trained and experienced lawyer, who was also a friend, gave me some sound counsel: do nothing, or better yet, do as my wife does, but do not get caught. Because even if her infidelity is discovered, if she can say I was unfaithful to the court, she may be able to screw me over even further. It is unbelievable. So, where does this leave me? Screwed. I left my lawyer's office, went back to my own, closed the door, and spent the rest of the day pondering: how did this occur? What did I do wrong? Why would she do this to me? My sense of failure struck me hard, sending me into a profound despair as I confronted the truth of my crumbling marriage. It hit me like a tsunami, leaving me feeling overwhelmed and like I was drowning. I know that sounds cliché, but that's how it felt. I kept thinking about the one piece of advice my lawyer had pounded into me: do nothing. But how could I possibly accomplish that? For how long? And how would I know when it was time to end things? The uncertainty was making me physically ill inside. I felt hollow as I realized my marriage was a fake. My wife was using me for her personal ends and betraying both me and our children. Her personal fulfillment appeared to be more important to her than our family. Was I overreacting? Should I call them down and devise a plan? I knew I needed a plan, but I didn't know where to start that would demand some serious consideration. Around 6 p.m., I got home and put up a show of being a happy husband and parent. During the journey home, I vowed not to reveal that I knew about my wife's betrayal. No, I'd act ridiculously thrilled, and so I decided to do precisely what my wife did. If it was okay for her, it was fine for me. Quid pro quo, correct? This became my new slogan: screw her, please. Excuse me if I occasionally ramble or sound incoherent. All of this has been weighing hard on my mind, and it feels good to let it out. A week later, I saw a psychotherapist who began inquiring about my connection with my parents and whether I had any troubles with my father. I instantly ignored his psychoanalysis and chose to address things on my own by jotting down my views. So, a few months later, after much soul-searching and understanding, I needed to take action to restore some control and justice in this twisted-up scenario. I ended up in a friends with benefits relationship with a woman from work. She works for the same law firm as I do, divorced with 2 young children in elementary school. Amanda Stewart is 1 year older than me. She's tall, thin, very fit, and absolutely attractive, and I can't understand why she wants to sleep with me. I mean, she could have any man she wanted by simply snapping her fingers. Don't get me wrong, I am not a fat, ugly jerk, quite the reverse. I'm exactly 6 foot tall, weigh 195 pounds, and keep in shape. I regularly run, bike, and go to the gym. I have a full head of brown hair and just use reading glasses, and I'm not bad looking. Plus, my wife was the one who chased me when we first started dating. Amanda told me that she gave up trying to be happy while married. After much soul-searching, she recognized her husband was not the right person for her. They attempted to make it work, but ultimately decided they shouldn't be together. Later, I discovered that the father of her children is not her ex-husband, which led to their divorce. I can see why that would be a deal-breaker. It would be for me if I discovered my children weren't biologically mine. But it isn't my circumstance. I have gotten my DNA tested. Amanda's requirements are finally met my needs. We both enjoy our time together and even talk afterwards. She's intelligent and refined, the type of woman a man might readily fall for. I feel comfortable with her, not like the strain I experienced with Laura. We have little emotional involvement in each other. Maybe Laura's connection with her lover is comparable. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. I figured if Laura ever broke up with her lover, I would do the same. However, there were no indicators of this happening. My investigators' periodic checks proved that my wife saw her boyfriend at least once a week. So, I decided to get tested for STDs on a regular basis, just to be safe. Fortunately, the tests were consistently negative. Maybe Laura's boyfriend wears protection, or he's simply clean. In any event, I made a mental note to be checked every 3 months, in case any unwanted guests wrote along with her. Amanda and I always use protection, safety first. Allow me to explain a few things. My wife's name is Laura Grosvenor. Kennedy is at work. She goes by Grosvenor because she believes it sounds more sophisticated than Kennedy. But let's get real, the name Kennedy is nearly synonymous with American nobility. Laura believes that her maiden name, Grosvenor, carries centuries of English status and may attract high-end clientele to the firm where she works. We are both 34 years old and live in Albany, namely in the Pleasant Pine Hills neighborhood. Our house is close to the university and the state capital's downtown area. My drive to work is brief, only a few minutes. Laura's office is also downtown, but she regularly drives because she travels for business. Laura owns a new leased Mercedes, whereas I drive a 3-year-old Subaru Outback. On the surface, our lives appear totally normal. We're preoccupied with children, careers, and the responsibilities of everyday life. Our house is approximately 80 years old but has been well maintained and upgraded over the years. It's a 3-story Queen and Victorian home with plenty of room. We could go all day without meeting until mealtime. We have 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, and not nearly enough closet space. The basement and 3rd floor are used to store clothes, seasonal decorations, costumes, and sports equipment. I have a separate 2-car garage in the back that houses my gardening equipment. Laura is always changing things, such as transforming a small bedroom into a walk-in closet for the master suite within 2 hours. We lived a typical upper-middle-class existence and assumed everything was okay, at least I did. It turns out Laura was missing something. It's been a while since I started seeing minor things that led me to believe Laura was having an affair. She was quite adept at concealing it. I mean, when she arrived home, there were no indicators she had spent the afternoon with her boyfriend. We'd cook dinner, speak about our day, and arrange our schedules for the next several days. It all felt uncomfortably routine and banal. Perhaps that was the problem, normal and dull, there's no enthusiasm. Everything appeared fine until I came across something alarming while looking for Laura's car keys in her handbag. She attempted to relocate her automobile, which was obstructing the garage. I found another cell phone. It was off, so I turned it on. It was secured with a 6-digit code, and after a few futile attempts, I quit to prevent being locked out. I didn't want Laura to know I'd been snooping, so I turned it off and back on. I spent days wondering why she had 2 phones. Every conclusion implied that she was hiding something, but what and why were the main questions. I examined our life together, our marriage, and our work to find solutions. Rather than face her, I hired an investigator. What they discovered confirmed my worst fears. Laura wanted more excitement, but not for me. When people become bored, they tend to try new hobbies or activities. Laura's response was to engage in an affair. How do I address this? I looked for a logical, unemotional approach, but my children compounded everything. Confronting Laura calmly may result in her quitting the affair or seeking a divorce. What if she decides to divorce and battle for custody of the children? Everyone loses in a legal dispute, except the lawyers who make $300 per hour. The children suffer the most, as do Laura and I. If we split up, it had to be mutual and without causing further hurt, so I took my lawyer's advice: do nothing. I thought about it for weeks, trying to figure out why Laura cheated. Was this my fault? Did I neglect her? Has our romanticism faded? Was I overly boring, or maybe I wasn't that good in bed? These doubts tormented me, but I realized I needed to make adjustments. I began exercising more. I used to work out a few times a week, but now I run every morning at 5 a.m. and have lost 8 pounds and inches around my waist in 2 months. I also go to the gym near my office twice a week, gradually increasing my strength with weights. If I wasn't appealing to Laura anymore, I intended to improve myself by getting into better shape. I hope she notices me again. I tried taking her out to romantic dinners, but her phone would always interrupt. I tried seductive massages with candles and music, but her phone destroyed the mood yet again. Even when I switched it off, she complained about missed work calls. Everything I tried failed. We settled into a new rhythm. It became dull quickly, especially for me. What was the point? Laura was seeing Jason, and I started a relationship with someone who cheated frequently. I gave up any moral high ground I thought I had, but it felt right somehow. A few months later, after a lazy afternoon of intimacy with Amanda, we had a conversation. Sometimes we both desired an intense, rapid deed without the romanticism and building of a committed relationship. We knew our relationship was only about acting, but that didn't mean we didn't care about each other. I genuinely cared about Amanda. She is a wonderful woman and an excellent mother, but we both knew it wouldn't last. I wanted to keep my life simple, or so I thought. 6 months later, things remained pretty much the same. I had the investigators check on Laura every few months. She was still visiting her sweetheart once or twice every week. Knowing this, I didn't rush to end things with Amanda. In fact, we became closer over the months. We even introduced our children to each other. I'll get back to that shortly. Laura mentioned during dinner at home on Thursday night that she was going to a real estate convention in Las Vegas for a week. It was supposed to be about industry updates, but these events were really just excuses to party at upscale resorts. I knew this convention wouldn't be any different. I saw it as an opportunity to shake things up and show Laura what she could be risking. Well, who am I kidding? Laura understood exactly what she was doing. She was not naive. She understood the risks and rewards of cheating on our marriage. The convention occurred during spring break. We had intended to take the kids to Disney World, but that plan was abandoned when Laura's convention unexpectedly appeared on her schedule. I was frustrated by her selfishness and disregard for our family. We agreed to take the kids to Disney World this year. My face clearly showed my annoyance that she chose Las Vegas instead. This convention is really important to me, Jim. Plus, Becca is too small for some rides. Her brother can go on. If she can't do everything, it'll just lead to arguments. Wait, we can manage with Becca if we explain it to her. She's smart and understands about safety. I don't get why you're putting another convention ahead of our family, I thought. She gave a big sigh and rolled her eyes. The company wants me there, and everything's already booked. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm going to the convention. End of story. The rest of the evening was quiet. After putting the kids to bed, I took a long shower. My mind was racing. I didn't sleep well that night, but I came up with an idea, something fair in my view. A few days later, I suggested to Amanda that we take both our kids to Disney World in Florida for a short vacation. I didn't tell Laura about it. After sorting out the details, Amanda and I agreed to go ahead with the plan. We booked flights and the resort promptly. Laura hadn't even left for the airport when I started packing the kids. They were thrilled beyond words. I advised them to keep it a secret from Mom for now, and they eagerly agreed with large smiles. The day after Laura left for her Vegas pool party with real estate salespeople, Amanda and I flew to Orlando with our 4 kids. The non-stop trip takes a little under 3 hours. By mid-afternoon, we were basking in the warm sun while the kids played in the pool in their swimwear. This was a new experience for Amanda and me. Until now, our time together had primarily been about casual closeness. Our children had previously met ironically on a Saturday in downtown Albany during our journey. We ended up eating lunch together at a fast food restaurant featuring a children's play area. Amanda and I had a different type of talk than normal. She spoke more openly about her marriage and its demise. She also expressed how dedicated she is to her children following her divorce. She recognized her mistakes and is determined to be a wonderful mother. She cares strongly about her children and wants the best for them. We're working hard to provide it. I told her about how angry and betrayed I felt when I discovered Laura's romance with Jason. Amanda listened closely, keeping an eye on her children. I attempted to read her expression to determine what she was thinking. She was in full legal mode. She shared her opinions with me, stating, "You know, Jim, your current situation is almost like an open marriage, even if you haven't acknowledged it. Are you certain this is how you want to live?" I looked at her and said, "I haven't confronted Laura yet because I don't want to disrupt the lives of the two kids over there. I don't want to be a weekend dad who only sees his children a few weeks a year. Everything I've read suggests that children suffer the most during a divorce. That is not something I can risk, not yet." I took a deep breath, remembering I hadn't breathed for the previous minute while chatting. I knew Amanda would eventually want to leave our friends with benefits relationship. That's simply who she was. In my mind, I knew she wasn't about monogamy, given her past. It appeared that our relationship would end the longer it lasted. I assumed she would find someone fresh for that type of connection, however, she didn't. So, here we were in Disney World, pretending to be a large, happy family with 4 children. I reserved 2 connected rooms at the resort, one with 2 queen beds and the other with 2 sets of bunk beds for the children. I had to pay more to get the room set up properly, but it was worth it. Money has the power to bring about change. We spent the mornings and early afternoons exploring the park, riding as many rides and visiting as many attractions as possible. When the kids became tired and hot, we'd return to the hotel and cool off in the pool. By dinner time, the kids were ready for bed, giving Amanda and me some time to unwind with beverages, food, and then each other. 5 days at Disney World were great. The kids got to try everything, including a day at SeaWorld, and they enjoyed every minute of it. They were sad to go when it came time to go home and back to school. I needed to get back to work, and Amanda did too. Laura, on the other hand, was resuming her daily routine at home. Laura arrived later the same day we got back, tanned but with a nasty headache from all the partying in Vegas. The kids enthusiastically told her about our trip to Disney World and SeaWorld. She stared at me, voicing her displeasure and questioning why I took them without her. "What the heck, Jim? I assumed we were going to Disney World as a family. Why did you take them without me?" she exclaimed. "Remember, we discussed it, and you opted to travel to Vegas for your convention rather than join us. If we aren't important enough to you, we're sorry we went without you. We had a wonderful time." "I hope Vegas was worthwhile," I replied before exiting the room. Too awful for her, I thought. She spent 6 days in Vegas with her partner while I enjoyed 5 days of fantastic time with Amanda. I told her that we had promised the kids that they could go during the school break, and I didn't want to disappoint the kids with her decision to go to Vegas. At the same time, it's bad she missed out, but she prioritized Vegas over family, her loss. Monday arrived, and I was back at work, staying busy. It took me 2 weeks to catch up with Amanda again. She had been gone seeing clients. I wondered if this was her attempt to figure out our arrangement. Perhaps spending time with me and 4 children in Disney World was too much for her. But it wasn't. Amanda texted me numerous times to express how much her children had enjoyed their trip to Disney World, and she had to agree. The second time we met, I noticed a small difference in how we behaved. She appeared more relaxed when we met in bed. She expressed extra affection by running her fingers through my hair and held me tight. The powerful performance was transitioning into something more gentle. We remained focused on pleasing each other, but there was a shift when it was just us. Amanda began calling me dear and honey. Meanwhile, Laura's situation remained unaltered. The investigators' recent report corroborated what I already knew. Laura continued to meet her lover on a regular basis. So, I decided to keep with my schedule. Don't get me wrong, I was still close to Laura, but we were on a rigorous Saturday night schedule. Laura, on the other hand, kept making excuses, asking people over, and suggesting activities, only to later say she was too fatigued for personal contact. More often than not, I received a short kiss on the lips, and that was the end of it. As a result, we became intimate perhaps once a month at most. I tried to be the understanding husband, but truthfully, I was losing tolerance. Laura started this, and I had gotten skilled at seeing potential problems. 8 months later, my life has undergone several adjustments, so many that it might be daunting to know where to begin. First and foremost, Laura dropped a bombshell around 7 months ago. She is pregnant. She said this roughly a month after returning from the Vegas convention, given our limited intimacy prior to that. I'm almost convinced I am not the father. I wanted to wait until the baby was born before having a DNA test done locally in Albany, which can provide results in as little as 24 hours. Laura is currently heavily pregnant and has greatly reduced her work hours, but she continues to see her lover on a daily basis. If the DNA test verifies my assumptions, I hope Laura's partner is willing to accommodate her and their child in his one-bedroom apartment. Following Laura's pregnancy announcement, I went with my lawyer again to discuss my options. Establishing paternity through DNA testing is critical since under New York law, any child born during a marriage is presumed to be the husband's unless proven differently. As a result, obtaining a DNA test as soon as the kid is delivered is a major priority for me. My lawyer also suggested looking into other legal options once the DNA test confirmed parentage, but that is a matter for later discussion. Laura, I am in terrible difficulty. I'm very convinced I became pregnant during the Vegas convention. There was this guy I'd seen at previous meetings, and I ended up hooking up with him. This time, owing to booze and poor judgment, it lasted for 3 days. It was a tremendous mistake, compounded by another one. I forgot to refill my birth control prescription last month because I got busy. I expected it to take longer than 3 months to become pregnant after stopping the pill, but it appears that I am one of the few cases where it happened sooner. When the baby arrives, Jim and everyone else will realize he isn't the father. This is a mess. Now what do I do? My husband might leave me. He'll probably kick me out. I suppose I deserve that, but we are still a family, and I deserve some consideration. I will fight for my children, even if it means threatening him. I want to stay together as a family if I can persuade Jim to forgive me and accept this baby as his own like our other children. We might be able to move on from this, maybe. Should I confess now or wait? Jim and I became close a few days after I returned from the convention when we finally got intimate. I made certain he did it inside me, just in case. Amanda, I learned a big lesson from my brief marriage to Michael. His new wife, Rebecca, benefited from my mistakes. She waited and watched me fall apart, then swooped in and claimed Michael for herself. She was patient and strategic, and in the end, she won. So, I decided to take a page from her book. It seems Laura, Jim's wife, let her desires guide her decisions. I used to do the same, but I wised up. I decided to wait for the right moment to make my move. I want a husband, a man who will be mine, and I'm ready to be faithful to him. Jim is everything I want in a husband. In many ways, he reminds me of my ex-husband, Michael. His loyalty to those who are loyal to him is strong, and he prioritizes his duty to his children. Maybe it's his Scottish and Irish heritage. Nonetheless, I chose to wait and see if Laura would ruin their marriage, and if she did, I'd be prepared to step in. Well, now is the time. You can criticize my past, and that's fair. I've learned from my mistakes, and I genuinely want a fresh start with a man I can be a good wife to. I'm not claiming to be perfect now, far from it, but I have changed. Last year, when I got to know Jim and saw what he's really like, I realized he could be the one. The trip to Disney World with all the kids was the catalyst that pushed me to make a plan. Honestly, I didn't have to do much. I just had to wait, subtly showed Jim how I feel, and prepare for the next step. My kids were already asking me if Jim's kids would be their new siblings and if Jim would be their dad. How much clearer could it be? Laura phoned me at my office to report her water had broken. I ran home, collected our hospital bag, made calls to ensure the kids were picked up from school, and we sped to the hospital. Usually, labor for the third kid is quicker than the previous two, but the doctor warned us this one might be big. Turns out it went much faster than imagined. Within a couple of hours of arriving, our surprise baby daughter arrived into the world. The doctor, presenting her to the nurses, seemed astonished. She studied my reaction intently as they passed the infant to Laura. My suspicions concerning fatherhood were proven immediately when Laura looked at our kid and then at me. She saw my blank expression, my face said it all. I was stunned. There was an audible gasp from Laura as she realized her actions were exposed. I silently left the room, ignoring her calls, and walked to the nurse's station to fill out the birth certificate documents. I carefully filled out the documents, noting Laura's details. When it came to father, I scribbled unknown and left it at that. When the nurse noticed it, she looked at me and I nodded. As I left the hospital, I did not return. Laura returned home with the baby 2 days later, accompanied by her friend Kelly. Kelly seemed eager for information but kept silent, acknowledging me with a nod that seemed to indicate, "Your problem now, good luck." I left Laura on her own for the majority of the afternoon. By the time the kids arrived home from school, she had sought me in my home office, and I said, "What should we tell the kids about the baby?" I said, "Tell them whatever you think is best." Laura had no idea, but I had previously visited her real estate firm and spoken with a co-worker who had attended the Vegas convention alongside her. After some frank conversation, almost accusing her of infidelity in Vegas, she reluctantly revealed the name of the man Laura spent the majority of her time with. Armed with this information, I warned her not to tell Laura about what she had told me, otherwise I would be inclined to tell her spouse about all they did in Vegas. It wasn't the moral high ground, but it was all I had at the time, and it appeared to work. Now back to the original issue, how to explain to the children why their new sibling has a darker complexion. I began to plan what I would do next for my children and myself. Part of me wanted to publicly expose Laura as an unfaithful woman, but then I realized I didn't have to. Her deeds will speak for themselves. Once our family saw the infant, it was clear that I was not the father. Then what I called Mr. Glenn Duncan, a real estate agent in Houston. Duncan was well known in the community, a former NFL player who didn't get much action on the field but handled himself like a star. His knees went out, and he ended his football career prematurely. Duncan was a huge man, over 6 feet tall, weighing 220 pounds, still in good form, and frequently seen in nice outfits. His agency biography portrayed him as confident and successful, using his NFL experience to entice clients. Now he was ready to face a predicament he did not want. I called Mr. Duncan, and I must say our chat did not go well. When I asked if he knew Laura Grossner, he played stupid and stated he didn't know anyone with that name. He also couldn't recall whether he had attended last year's Vegas convention and abruptly ended the call, stating he was busy. As a parting shot, I told him Laura would be contacting him about their newborn daughter, and I'd be requesting a court-ordered DNA test. There was silence on the other end. I also attempted to obtain Mr. Duncan's home location and phone number for the court order, but the line abruptly went dead. It is evident that Mr. Duncan has a Mrs. Duncan and 3 children at home, with who knows how many more scattered across the country. To summarize, I have an unfaithful wife who became pregnant after a convention flirtation, resulting in a biracial child. My children are perplexed by their new sister having significantly darker skin than them, but they are naive enough not to make a fuss about it. I'll have to explain something to them soon. Right now, I need to work things out with Laura, and our future together is uncertain. Laura, I have really gotten myself into a problem. I need to speak with Jim and see if we can work anything out. He's typically sensible, and I believe he can be a father to this baby as well. He'll realize this over time and accept her as his own. I might phone Glenn and tell him it's a girl. We spoke when I discovered I was pregnant, but he was uninterested and virtually hung up on me. He even threatened to take legal action if I contacted him again. That's an appropriate response for someone who claimed to love me in Vegas while we were intimate. He has a large Johnson, but it isn't helping me right now. Jim has avoided me since the baby's birth. He interacts normally with our children but will not touch the infant. When she cries, he looks to me for comfort. He moved out of our bedroom, carrying his belongings to the spare room upstairs, and his toiletries to the ensuite bathroom. He placed the crib in the master bedroom where I am still sleeping. I'm confident he'll settle down in a few weeks and want to talk. He'll also desire to resume physical intimacy. I'll hit the gym to drop the remainder of my pregnancy weight. When he sees me naked, he will desire me, and everything will return to normal. Jim is spending more time outside with the kids, hiking in the park. They return home eager to tell me about their travels. Meanwhile, I'm here day and night to care for the infant. I really need to shower. Amanda, my marriage to Michael taught me an important lesson: just when you believe you've won, you may lose. Rebecca, his new wife, patiently waited for me to goof up, and when I did, she took the opportunity. She is now happily married to him with 2 children, and they live in the Scottish Highlands near the coast, on a large home that they are restoring. So instead of feeling remorseful, I waited for Laura to make a major mistake, and she did. It was my chance to pursue the man I wanted, Jim. I had learned not to be connected with men other than them. Jim, I knew, was basically a wonderful man, a dedicated parent who aspired to be an excellent husband. It was sad that his wife had been cheating on him for years. Detecting the signals of her adultery was simple for me, as I had made similar mistakes in the past. Michael did not father my children, instead, 2 of my lovers did. That is why Michael is currently married to someone else. When we spent time together at work, I made an effort to connect with Jim, both emotionally and physically. I attended his workplace whenever I could, and we began to have lunch together more frequently. Rumors circulated among the lawyers and staff about Laura's affair and the fact that Jim's newborn girl was not his. When Jim left the office for personal reasons, speculation of their divorce spread discreetly. People wondered if this was going to be the day everything fell apart. His lawyer's office wasn't far away, so he frequently walked there and back to clear his thoughts. He texted me when he was on his way, and I'd eagerly await his arrival. I knew Laura's days were numbered. Jim, I've been worrying over what to do with a wife who has had another man's baby and has been cheating on me for years, now flaunting it publicly. My first instinct was to pack up all of her possessions and kick her and the baby out, but realistically, I couldn't do it yet. The kids would ask too many questions, and I'm not heartless enough to handle them right now. I wish I could be. I realized I had to take action, even if it meant hurting the entire family. Laura's father gently advised me to do what I thought was right, as he couldn't believe his daughter would be so dumb. Laura's parents lived close in Albany and were excited to meet their new granddaughter. When they entered the master bedroom and saw the baby in her cot, both mother and father were stunned. Mom covered her mouth, stumbled back, and had to settle into a nearby chair. Dad only gazed at me, shaking his head in astonishment, before leaving the room. He went downstairs, poured himself a scotch, and sat at the dining table, staring into the glass. He did not move when Mom and I arrived a few minutes later. I was holding the baby in my arms, preparing to nurse. Mom looked at Dad, who had poured her a drink and pushed it towards her. She took a large gulp, and they both turned to stare at me. I resolved to tell them the truth, but not everything. It was too much for them to handle just now. So, I admitted to having a close relationship with a black man in Vegas last year. My father murmured, "Not everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas," which was a needless but truthful statement. My mother quickly addressed the obvious question, "What will happen between you and Jim now?" I sighed before responding, "I do not know." Mom glanced down at the table and continued, "Are you two separating?" I raised my head, responding firmly, "No." She pushed on, "Is he kicking you out?" "We have scarcely spoken since the baby was delivered. He spent as much time as possible with the kids outside of the house. He moved into the extra bedroom that I had intended to use for the baby, which is why the crib is in the master bedroom." Mom shook her head, disappointed, while Dad remained mute. She sighed heavily as she stared at the table, summarizing her thoughts. "Jesus, how could you have made such a silly mistake? I thought we raised you well." Her statement was not a question. I sat quietly while the baby nursed on my breast. My mom had hit the nail on the head. "Will Jim make me leave?" I hoped he'd understand and be apparent to this young girl, but whenever he glanced at her, he was reminded of my betrayal. It was obvious that I had cheated on him, and now for the outcome of the affair. It wasn't as if I had a long-term affair with Glenn. He was well known within his field, charming, and always generous with praises to women. This time, it was due to excessive alcohol consumption. I was at his hotel room on the first night of the conference. We spent the next few days together, which was exciting. I forgot about my typical chores, work, kids, spouse, and just enjoyed the attention he provided me. That and his big Josh on my V were exhausted, and I knew I needed to clean up before the flight and then prepare to see Jim and the kids. When I got home, the kids excitedly informed me about their recent trip to Disney World in Florida. I expressed to Jim that I had wanted to go there with my family. He stared at me and said, "You must be present for that," then they walked away. I was at a loss for what to do. I had a tremendous hangover, and no amount of showering could wash away the possibility that I had made a huge mistake in Vegas. I became really connected with Glenn. Booze and my lustful side took control, drowning out the part of my brain that should have remembered my children and husband in martinis. I wound up spending at least 4 days with Glenn. He is quite full of himself, with an ego larger than his well-endowed package, which I must admit was inside me for the majority of that time. When I returned home, I felt compelled to reconnect with Jim on a personal level. I believed it would bridge the growing gap between us, which had been widening for some time. Perhaps he had suspicions about Jason too. Recently, our lack of intimacy has had an impact on our family life, and I thought that we should prioritize spending more time together as a family. A few weeks later, I missed my period. My nipples were extremely sensitive, and I got morning sickness. I realized I was pregnant and needed to make a decision. I pondered terminating, but did not go with it. I prayed quietly, hoping against hope that the baby was Jim's, but it wasn't. "Jim, to answer the simple question, what do I do now?" I felt that meeting with my lawyer would provide me with insight about the challenges ahead. In my opinion, divorce was unavoidable. It's difficult to contemplate parenting a biracial child who everyone knows isn't biologically mine, born to two clearly white parents. It raises questions. Initially, I thought Jason to be the father, but this was not the case. Laura had also been unfaithful to him, which I considered quite amusing. You could believe my attitude is racist in the 21st century, but it is not about race. It is about Laura bearing another man's child. The child is innocent, they did not choose their parents. Whether the father is black or white is irrelevant. What matters is Laura's infidelity. My lawyer inquired whether I had completed DNA tests, which I had, and I submitted the results. I also disclosed the proof acquired by my investigator concerning the child's father, including photos. We examined New York State's family law and its ramifications, especially given Laura's obvious infidelity throughout our marriage. I made it clear to my lawyer, Leanne, that my two children were my primary priority. I wanted full custody and was prepared to fight hard for it. I intended to claim that Laura was unfit based on the evidence collected and that custody should be mine. I was financially secure enough to manage the battle and even hire a part-time babysitter for after-school care. There were legal precedents to back my cause, such as preserving possession of our house and offering Laura half of its value. Staying in the same house would give the kids stability and allow them to continue attending their present school. With the youngest now in school, securing after-school care was my primary concern, which I had addressed. I haven't yet discussed child support with Laura. My immediate intention was for her to go with the baby to begin the process. Leanne suggested creating a formal separation agreement. For those unfamiliar with this form of arrangement, as a lawyer, I view an essay as a legal document that precedes a divorce, essentially offering couples time apart to consider whether they want to save their marriage. Most articles, however, end up serving as the foundation for divorce, as few couples reconcile. It's very similar to a staged divorce. I wasn't sure if I wanted an essay, it seemed to be delaying the inevitable. Why prolong things? Leanne saw the essay as a way to determine whether the child's father would acknowledge paternity and provide financial support. It would also help get Laura out of the house, allowing the kids and myself to see how we do on our own. I was willing to give Laura ample visitation with the children. Her challenge would be to care for her baby and children alone every other weekend. Laura had given up the majority of parenting responsibilities in recent years. Her job and activities with Jason meant she frequently arrived home tired, hungry, and focused on work. She would sometimes leave in the evenings to attend client meetings or show houses. Some weeks, we spent very little time together as a family, so I got busy with the kids. They relied less on their mother, and we got on with our lives. Laura and I have barely talked since the baby was born. I didn't assist with the baby's care at all, that was all on Laura. About a month after the baby was born, on a Friday night, I took action. I pulled out a large envelope and spoke to her in a serious tone. "Laura, we need to talk." Her expression conveyed it all. She paled slightly, realizing that this was serious and would not go well for her. She hoped that delaying our discussion about the baby and her infidelity would distract me from the fact that she had another man's child. I poured her a glass of wine and slid it across the dining table. I had a glass of iced water for myself. The manila envelope was in front of me, and she stared at it while sipping. She nodded at the envelope and asked slowly, "What's inside there, Jim?" I got straight to the point. "This is the separation agreement that my lawyer prepared. I believe it is time for us to think about our future. Our marriage is not in good shape. Clearly, I am not the husband you want, and right now, you are not the wife I want. It is best for both of us to separate and reassess." Laura's eyes widened, and her hand started shaking. She took a big gulp of wine. I continued, "The agreement says I stay here with our kids, and you and your baby move out. You have a month to find a new place, take whatever furniture you need. You can see the kids as much as you want, but they'll live with me. I've arranged for a part-time nanny for after-school care, and when I'm not around work, I agreed to let me work from home more. Laura looked stunned. I had blindsided her with this essay, and she needed time to think. "Jim, why do you want us to leave?" she asked. My expression said it all. Let's be real, Laura. You cheated and got pregnant. I'm not okay with that. You've been unfaithful for years, and it ends now. So, you've got 30 days to pack up, find a place, take your baby, and leave. I was getting worked up, wanting to vent my frustrations, but I knew it wouldn't help. I had to put my children first. Staying calm was hard. I pushed the envelope towards her. Here's the separation agreement. I've tried to be fair. If you want, have a lawyer review it, but know this, I won't consider your baby mine. I got up from the table and left the room. The house fell silent for the next month. I tried to keep things normal at home, despite knowing my wife and her baby would soon move out. She found a 2-bedroom apartment near her office during her maternity leave, giving her time to settle in before returning to work. The separation agreement had specific dates, and I occasionally reminded her of the deadline to leave. We went through the house, and she chose items to take for her new place. I took down all the photos, especially ones with her in them, and made notes of changes I wanted to make when she moved out. During this period, I maintained a distinct connection with Amanda. From Laura, I wasn't even sure if Laura knew about Amanda. Amanda and I saw each other a few times a week and on weekends. We frequently did activities with our kids, such as hiking and visiting local parks, which the kids enjoyed now that they were a year older. Amanda was curious about Laura's plans. She inquired about what I planned to do following the 6-month separation. I honestly informed her that I didn't think there would be any reconciliation. Laura hardly spoke to me unless it was about the children. My plan was to proceed with a divorce. I initially pursued the agreement based on Leanne's advice, thinking about the children and both of our families. My mother in Arizona seemed unconcerned about my actions, but I knew Laura's family hoped I would forgive her and accept her child as my own. For me, respect was essential. It was necessary for marriage and relationships. I couldn't trust Laura to have my or our children's best interests at heart, and I realized I couldn't really care for her either. So, the marriage was coming to an end. Amanda was watching me attentively. She knew I was sad and vulnerable, but I knew I needed to take it gradually, prioritize my children, and make sure they have a secure home and life. And this is exactly what I did. Laura, it's been 6 months since I moved into this flat. Jim agreed to let me take enough stuff to make the space feel like home. I got something from the master bedroom, a number of kitchen items, including plates and a kitchen table with chairs. When the movers finished packing things, I looked around the house and realized how much I would miss it. I'll be returning to drop off the kids, but it will never be my home again. It aches to realize that my mistakes have cost me my family, my house, and the life I assumed I would always have. If only I had stayed away from gorgeous males. I believed I could be close to them quietly, but becoming pregnant altered everything. Now I'm in a 2-bedroom apartment, almost a single mother with no time for social activities. It's been months since I felt close. I start working next week, so I'll need daycare for the baby. My family hardly calls anymore. When I recently visited, the people at work gave me odd looks. Losing pregnancy weight has been slower than expected, and money is limited. I had to forego the smallest Mercedes and settle for a Volkswagen. Jim still drives his Subaru, certain things never change. He's the steady presence I'd always known. I expect the divorce papers to arrive soon. The separation agreement expires in a few weeks, and Jim exhibits no signals of forgiveness or reconciliation with me. I tried to talk to him the last time he dropped the kids off, but he simply stared at me and went. I'm starting to comprehend what he means by respect. It's a little late, Amanda. So, it's time for me to take action. The man I sought is now divorced, adjusting nicely to single parenthood. Jim manages kids, houses, and even has a social life with incredible organization. Our social life has primarily revolved around myself and my children, which suits me perfectly. We've been spending a lot of time together, almost as a family. The kids and I have begun spending more time at Jim's place, including overnight stays on weekends. I learned I squandered time with Michael and won't do it again with Jim. Michael was a good man who could have made an excellent parent to my children if he had been their father. My sense of entitlement was so powerful that I believed I could have everything I wanted. I had continuing affairs with multiple men before the inevitable happened. When Michael discovered the truth and confronted me, I became pregnant twice. I shut down and refused to speak. He left, telling me to contact him when I was ready to be honest. I was ashamed, so I never called. He eventually moved on and met someone who genuinely loved him. I really regret my foolishness and will not repeat it. The man I desired was now free to spend time with me, and I with him. But there was a new complication, Jim. So, I'm officially divorced now. I am a single father parenting 2 children who are developing rapidly. My job as a company and tax lawyer may be monotonous, but it pays well. I work from home part-time, allowing me to manage all of my children's crucial daily activities. Every day I get home around 4:30 to make supper, help with schoolwork, and handle their numerous activities. Laura has seen less and fewer of the children recently. She is back at work and struggles with being a mother to her infant, leaving little time for her elder children. I've reminded her that the kids miss her and need her presence. However, with her real estate job and weekend open houses, she spends less time with them. There isn't much I can do about that, so I've been planning lots of outdoor things for us. Amanda and her children visit us frequently, and if you didn't know better, you'd believe we were one big happy family. Things took a turn, Amanda. All of the indications and symptoms were present. This morning, my typical morning cup of coffee did not want to stay down. Damn, I ended up with my head in the toilet when breakfast returned unexpectedly. After washing up, I prepared the kids for school on my way to work. I stopped at the pharmacy next door and purchased a pregnancy test kit. You know, half of my mind was swearing like crazy because I knew what that meant. My breasts felt puffy and I saw my menstruation was late. I normally do not have heavy periods, and honestly, I'd forgotten about it. Nervously, I slipped the test kit inside my briefcase and went to work for the day. My mind was racing, worrying about getting home and taking the test. When I finally went home and got the kids to bed, I walked to the bathroom and closed the door, despite the fact that it is attached to the master bedroom. After taking a deep breath, I removed the test from the package and prepared to use it. I held it beneath the water and then placed it aside to work its magic. I cleaned up and walked downstairs to the kitchen, feeling anxious. If the test revealed what I feared, it would mark a watershed moment in my relationship with Jim, a make or break scenario. As I returned to the bathroom, my hand shook slightly. I picked up the small white plastic piece. "Boy," I whispered, my heart sinking. I considered talking to Jim and persuading him to return to my bed, but he refuses to talk to me. What can I do? Jason, my regular boyfriend, has moved on months ago. I've heard he's dating a senior at the university, which seems serious. I've got to balance taking care of the baby with my employment. I don't have time for a social life. I'm hesitant to go out to clubs with my coworkers since you never know who you'll meet. I mean, what are my options? So, I thought my husband may be a safe bet. I still love him, he's the father of 2 of my children, and I believe he still cares for me. I figured I had nothing to lose by trying to talk to Jim. I needed to plan things carefully, without the baby, in a neutral environment. I decided to invite him to a downtown restaurant called the Beer Barn. Despite the name, it's a classy yet casual establishment with a menu Jim enjoys and a large beer selection. I know he likes it there. So that's where I invited him to meet me. I called him and asked to meet up. He surprised me by agreeing. Since Emma's birth, we've barely spoken. I knew I needed to tread carefully during this critical meeting. It was our last chance to fix our broken marriage. The paperwork was completed, but I still believed there was hope. So long as we shared our children, we got a chance. I still needed him. Jim, I questioned whether I should go meet Laura or not. Eventually, I decided to move past my disappointment and listen to her. My main concern was the children, and perhaps this meeting was for something important she needed to discuss. While she could have used her lawyer or called me, I felt we should act like adults and talk in person, so I agreed to meet her at the Beer Barn. But I decided to bring some backup supplies. Laura, when I arrived at the Beer Barn, Jim was already there with another woman, a blonde, attractive woman. They were sitting across from each other, holding hands. Damn! As I approached the table, they stood, and she moved closer to Jim's side. Introductions were awkward to say the least. I hadn't anticipated someone else being there with him. Jim seemed calm with a slight grin. My plan to win him back and reunite our baby and me with him and the kids was dashed. Jim introduced her as Amanda. She was good-looking, around our age, and remained quiet, observing me like a hawk eyes its prey. I knew right then I had lost. Jim ordered a drink for me and took the liberty of ordering food for all of us. He knew Amanda well enough to know her preferences, which doubled down after the food was ordered and drinks were served. Jim started, "So, Laura, what did you want to talk about?" I stumbled over my words, trying to come up with something plausible. I talked about the kids and my plans for them in the coming months. Jim described his Christmas plans, including a ski vacation to Vermont with the kids. I nodded along and agreed to everything he mentioned. I hadn't noticed before, but when Amanda removed her bulky sweater, it became obvious she was pregnant. My eyes widened as I looked at her belly. It wasn't huge, but her baby bump was definitely there. I knew exactly what that meant. "Laura, I need to tell you something. I'm selling the house. You'll get your share after we settle the mortgage with the bank. Amanda and I are moving in together, and we found a house that suits us better." Jim, that sink in, then with a big smile, he continued, "Amanda is pregnant. We are expecting a baby in 5 months. With that, the final nail in the coffin of my marriage was hammered in. Any lingering hope of reconciliation vanished right before my eyes. It probably started when I first started sleeping with Jason and escalated swiftly when I was with Glenn for those 4 days in Vegas. I wish the ground would swallow me up right then, but it didn't happen. I just nodded at them and quietly said, "I have to go." I left the restaurant and grabbed a taxi back to my apartment. I was so engrossed in my thoughts that I forgot my car was parked nearby. 1 year later, Amanda. "All right, I guess I get the last word. We've settled into our new home, which is spacious enough for all of the kids. It's in a beautiful neighborhood, not far from Jim's previous residence. It's even bigger than the last one. We had a pool installed before moving in with Jim, our newborn, and 4 children. Managing the house and work exhausts me before bedtime, but I always make sure to be close to my husband. Yes, we are married now. Jim insisted that our children have married parents, so we got married shortly before the baby was born. We sleep naked, therefore we make love virtually every night. At this pace, I might get pregnant again soon. We still have a nanny to care for the baby during work hours and after school for the kids. Let's be clear, I learned from my first marriage. I was dumb to take Michael for granted. I did not show him the respect he deserved. I will not make that mistake again. I am completely committed to my husband and our family. I cannot believe how pleased I am right now. I'm probably happier than I should be. Jim is an excellent parent to all of our children. I genuinely adore that man, and I know he loves me. 3 years ago, I would not have predicted this conclusion. Here is the next story. I only wanted one night of freedom with another guy, but my spouse got upset about it and did this. Hello, read it. It feels awkward to tell my tale here, but I suppose everyone needs an outlet. My name is Morgan, and until lately, I believed I had everything sorted out. I had been blissfully married to William for 3 years, and we were living the dream we had envisioned since high school. If someone had told me a few months ago that this would be my life now, I would have assumed they were lying or joking at all, but now my worst has become a reality. William and I were high school sweethearts. We met in our junior year when everything looked conceivable, and love appeared to be the answer to every question. He was the shy, smart man in class, and I was the outgoing social butterfly. We somehow clicked and soon were inseparable. I recall our first date as if it were yesterday. It was a lovely spring afternoon, and William had summoned the confidence to ask me out. He was apprehensive, fumbling over his words as he invited me to a nearby diner for milkshakes. I agreed without hesitation, my heart fluttering with excitement. The first date was fantastic. We sat in a comfortable corner booth, sipping our milkshakes and chatting for hours. William was an excellent listener and could make me laugh like no one else. We discussed everything and nothing, sharing our goals, dreams, and anxieties. As the sun began to set, we reluctantly exited the diner, neither of us wanting the night to end. We walked hand in hand through the park, the world around us receding into the background as we lost ourselves in one another's presence under the starry sky. I knew I had found someone wonderful. William and I were excited to spend more time together. We had rapidly become each other's best friend and confidant, and our second date was equally remarkable as the first. A few days after our first date, William surprised me by arriving at my home with a picnic basket in hand. He had set up a romantic picnic in the park, replete with sandwiches, fruit, and my favorite chocolate chip cookies. It was a very sweet gesture, and I couldn't help but smile as we strolled to the park together. We found a private spot beneath a giant oak tree and spread a blanket. The weather was ideal, with the sun beaming brightly overhead and a light breeze blowing the leaves. We talked and laughed, sharing stories about our childhoods, future goals, and everything in between. As we sat there, enjoying each other's company, I felt a wave of tranquility and satisfaction rush over me. It was then that I realized William was someone unique, someone I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. After we finished our lunch, we took a walk through the park, discovering the meandering trails and admiring nature's beauty. We came upon a pond with a small dock, and William suggested that we sit and enjoy the sunset. It was the perfect conclusion to a beautiful day, and while we sat there watching the sky turn orange and pink, I was grateful to have William by my side. Our second date strengthened our bond, and we were inseparable after that. By our third date, I was beginning to fall for William. We'd been friends for a while, and I'd always felt a connection between us, but I never dreamed it would lead to anything more. As we sat in the nice little cafe enjoying our coffees, William asked me to be his girlfriend. I was surprised, but in the greatest conceivable manner. I could see sincerity in his eyes, and I knew I wanted to be with him as well. I answered, "Of course." We spent the remainder of the day roaming about the city together, feeling on top of the world. Everything felt different after that. I felt different. It felt like all the parts of my life were finally coming into place. On our fourth date, William and I agreed to try something new and exciting. We both enjoyed the outdoors, so we decided to go for a hike in a nearby national park. The weather was perfect, with the sun shining and a light breeze blowing through the trees. As we walked, we talked about everything from our favorite childhood memories to our hopes and dreams for the future. We stumbled upon a wonderful clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley below. We sat on a large rock, and William took out a small picnic that he had packed. It was nothing fancy, just sandwiches, fruit, and a bottle of wine. We laughed and talked for hours, enjoying each other's company and the quiet surroundings. As the sun began to set, we reluctantly returned to the car, happy and satisfied. It was a day I'll never forget, one that made me realize how much I felt for William and how unique our relationship was. Being with William was incredibly easy. He was kind, attentive, and always made me laugh. We shared a wide range of interests, as well as similar values and life goals. I felt like I could be true to myself around him, and he accepted me for who I was, flaws and all. My feelings for him grew stronger as our relationship developed. I had no idea I could have such strong feelings for someone. Every moment with him was memorable, whether we were out on a fancy date or just cuddling up on the couch watching movies. He made me feel loved and cherished in ways I had never known before. I was absolutely thrilled when William proposed to me. It was the happiest day in my life. I couldn't wait to be with him forever, creating a life and family together. I knew that with him by my side, I could handle whatever life threw at us. We continued making memories together, exploring new places, trying new things, and falling deeper in love with each passing day. We helped each other through the ups and downs of high school, celebrating each other's accomplishments and comforting each other in times of need. But as the saying goes, everything good must come to an end. Our story took a turn neither of us could have anticipated, and now I'm here, reminiscing about a simpler time when all we needed was love. Looking back, I can't help but smile at how far we've come since our first date. Our love has only grown stronger. William is my rock, my best friend, and my soulmate. I'm so grateful to have him in my life, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for us. Our love story continued throughout college. We both attended the same university, studying hard during the week and enjoying each other's company on the weekends. We had plans, big plans. We talked about our future, about getting married, about starting a family. It all seemed so perfect, so certain. After college, we both landed jobs in our respective fields. William found success as a programmer. His skills were in high demand in the tech industry. I found a job at a local company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. We moved into a cozy little apartment, filled it with our dreams and aspirations, and settled into our new life together. Life was good, we were happy, or so I thought. Looking back now, I realized that maybe I was too caught up in my own world to see the cracks forming in our relationship. We still went on date nights, still said I love you every day. But something had changed. Maybe it was the monotony of everyday life, the routine that had crept into our marriage. Perhaps it was my own doubts, my fear of losing out on something more thrilling and intense. As the years passed, our lives settled into a comfortable routine. We both had demanding jobs, and most of our days were spent working hard and trying to make ends meet. Our evenings were spent together, watching TV or just talking about our day. While I loved William greatly, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I began to feel restless, desiring excitement and adventure. Our life together had become predictable, and I longed for anything else. I wanted to feel alive again, to experience the excitement of the unknown. I tried to throw off these feelings, telling myself that I was being selfish. After all, I had a lovely husband, a solid job, and a pleasant existence. But the longing lingered, getting greater with each new day. I started to retreat from William, losing interest in our normal activities. I would often find myself caught in thought, wondering about a life less mundane. I knew I needed to do something to get away from the monotony, but I wasn't sure what. As the days passed, my thoughts turned to fantasies of cheating on William. I knew it was wrong, but the idea of something spontaneous and adventurous was too appealing to pass up. I considered advocating an open relationship, but deep down, I knew William would never consent to such an arrangement. I craved a taste of the forbidden, something to break the routine of our daily lives. The prospect of being with someone else, even for a while, filled me with a rush of excitement I hadn't felt in years. I realized I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop myself. The thrill of the unknown beckoned to me, whispering promises of adventure and desire. I tried to ignore these feelings and concentrate on my marriage and the life I had created with William. However, the longing for something more persisted, becoming greater with each passing day. It was a difficult moment in my marriage to William. There were times when I was tempted to cheat. Moments of weakness occurred when I sought validation or excitement outside of our relationship. I even went so far as to download a dating app and go on many dates. However, I never crossed the boundary into physical intimacy. Fear held me back, fear of being caught, fear of injuring William, fear of losing what we'd accomplished together. I recall the anxiety that consumed me. I was constantly worried that someone would recognize me or that my actions would somehow lead back to William. It was a gloomy era in which I felt adrift and uncertain about myself. I found consolation in the obscurity of new clubs, where I could pretend to be single and mingle with random people. But as things began to escalate, I always backed away, paralyzed by terror. I now recognize that these activities were a symptom of a larger problem within myself. I was looking for anything outside of our relationship to fill a hole. Now I know deep down that nothing can ever replace the relationship I had with William. As time passed, I felt myself feeling increasingly distant from William, despite his efforts to liven things up and inject some excitement into our life. I couldn't shake the sense of ennui that had descended around me like a thick cloud. William did his best, he actually did. He organized spontaneous date nights, surprised me with lovely gifts, and even proposed that we do new things in our bedroom. But no matter what he accomplished, I felt as if something was missing. I could tell he was trying to overcompensate for my restlessness and dissatisfaction, but no matter how hard he tried, I couldn't shake the idea that our relationship had become monotonous and predictable. I truly felt guilty for feeling that way. William was a fantastic husband who was always caring and supportive of me, despite his attempts. But I couldn't help but feel that something was missing from our connection. As the weeks progressed into months, my boredom and restlessness worsened. I knew deep down it was my fault. I should have spoken with William about how I was feeling. Perhaps he advised that we try therapy or something to liven things up. But I did not. Instead, I let my feelings stew, slowly poisoning our connection. I grew increasingly detached, buried in my own ideas and fantasies about what life might be like if things were different. I realized I was being unjust to William. He did not deserve to be abused like this. He was a nice man, a caring spouse, and he deserved more than I was providing him. But I couldn't control myself. I was locked in a cycle of craving for something more, something thrilling and fresh, while also feeling terrible about wanting it. It was a vicious loop that I had no idea how to break. Then one day, an opportunity arose that changed everything. My co-workers and best friends invited me out for a girls' night out, and I chose to go, in the hopes that it would cheer me up. Little did I realize that decision would set me on a journey I never could have envisioned. I was always a gregarious person, but I wasn't particularly close to my coworkers until Emily and Jessica, two of my best friends, started working at the same company. We'd all been friends since college, and their presence at work brought a new level of excitement to my day's work, which had previously been simply another monotonous aspect of my routine, and made it more fun. As the weekend arrived, Emily and Jessica offered a girls' night out with our other close college and high school pals. I eagerly agreed, feeling the urge to break free from the monotony of my everyday routine. I hadn't been out with my pals in a while, so the idea of a good night out brightened my spirits. I told William about my plans, and he understood my need for time away and urged me to go and have fun. When the weekend arrived, I was excited about the idea of a night out with my pals. It had been ages since we had done anything together. I put more thought into my attire than usual, hoping to feel unique for the event. We began the evening with street food, enjoying one another's company and reminiscing about our high school years and where everyone had ended up. Then we went to a neighborhood pub and enjoyed some beers and fun. As the night progressed, I observed a man across the room who drew my attention. He was attractive, and there was something intriguing about him. We exchanged smiles, and I felt a rush of enthusiasm. My friends encouraged me to approach him, even though I was initially hesitant because I was married. They dismissed my fears, claiming it was just a girls' night out and I deserved to have a good time. They also stated that there were no rules on a girls' night out and they felt empowered by their support. I stepped up to him, and we started a chat. He introduced himself as Vincent. He was charming and easy to talk to, so we were soon laughing and enjoying each other's company. Vincent joined our group, and we all had a terrific time together. As the evening progressed and the cocktails poured, we all became bolder and bolder. I was drawn to Vincent, and we started making out. At that moment, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in a long time. The thought of doing something spontaneous and thrilling appealed to me, and I allowed myself to become swept up in the moment. Vincent suggested we return to his apartment, and with little hesitation, I agreed. My companions cheered me on, encouraged me, and even offered to cover for me if necessary. I should have known it was a lie. When I look back, I greatly regret the decisions I took that night. While under the influence of alcohol, I let my defenses down, resulting in a blunder that would change everything. I returned to Vincent's flat, and in a moment of weakness, cheated on my spouse. We had sex, and for a while, I let myself forget about everything else. We even watched a movie together, and in that moment, I felt like I was single again, free of duties and cares. I was so caught up in the moment that I forgot to text my husband, informing him that I wouldn't be returning home and would be staying with a friend. It was a selfish act, motivated by the need for excitement and spontaneity, but one that I would later greatly regret. The following morning, reality struck me like a ton of bricks. I'd done something very wrong. The guilt, disgust, and sorrow were overwhelming. I packed my belongings and left Vincent's apartment, feeling guilty and shattered. As I made my way home, I was overcome with anxiety. How could I confront my husband after what I had done? When I got home, my husband was surprised that I hadn't contacted or texted him the night before, like I had promised. I lied, telling him I had stayed with a friend because I was too inebriated to drive. He seemed to believe my statement and inquired about my night. I lied again, stating everything was wonderful and that I had missed him and our friends. The remorse over lying to him weighed heavy on me, but I was too confused and afraid to tell him the truth. I felt caught, unsure whether to confess and risk losing him or to remain silent and hope it all went away. In the end, I chose to conceal the truth, expecting to go on and pretend it never occurred. I attempted to go on with my life as usual, but the guilt weighed hard on me, especially since my spouse was so kind and caring to me. When I returned to work, I noticed my friends acting strangely, which I attributed to the embarrassing activities of the night before. With everything on my mind, I didn't think about it too much. However, as I reflected on my friend's behavior, I noticed red flags. What types of friends might urge me to cheat on my husband? I began to distrust their commitment and their power over me. The regret and shame of my deeds consumed me, and I realized how difficult it was to live a lie. It seemed like I was stuck between a rock and a hard place. I didn't want to lie to my spouse, but neither did I want to lose him. So, I attempted to put up with the guilt, expecting it would eventually go away. I started being overly kind to him in an attempt to make amends for my conduct. However, it appeared that the more I tried, the more distant he became. No matter how hard I tried to stay close to him, I couldn't escape the feeling that he was sliding away. I no longer felt the same need and appetite for spontaneity that I had previously. It was as if my life had reverted to normal, and the excitement I had desired had faded. My friends, who were once so close to me, suddenly appeared distant, as if they were hiding something from me. Even my husband, whom I tried so hard to be close to, remained distant. No matter how hard I tried to spice things up and bring some excitement back into my life, he merely grew more distant. I found myself missing the days when everything was new and thrilling, the excitement of attempting something new, stepping outside of my comfort zone. But now, everything seemed stale and repetitive. I tried talking about it with my friends to rekindle some of the old magic, but they didn't seem interested. It was as if they had moved on and left me behind. My relationship with my husband suffered the most. We used to be so close, but now there was a gap between us that I couldn't seem to close. I tried to be more affectionate and attentive, but nothing seemed to help us reconcile. He was constantly preoccupied with work or his own thoughts, and I felt as if I was losing him. I started questioning everything. Did I make a mistake? Was I destined to lead a life of mediocrity, always wishing for something more but never quite achieving it? I knew I needed to do something, but I wasn't sure what. My life had turned into a never-ending cycle of work, home, sleep, and repeat, and I felt trapped inside it. I missed my husband, I missed our close bond, but I wasn't sure what was bothering him. I tried to bury the guilt and pretend it never happened. However, the truth eventually emerges. A few weeks ago, my husband surprised me with a restaurant reservation. He said he felt things had become strained between us recently, and that going out would help us reconnect. I was excited because it had been a long time since we had done something like this together. I had work that day, so I told him I'd come back, and we could go out to dinner. When I arrived at work that day, there were some red flags that I should have noticed, but I was too preoccupied with my routine to pay attention. During lunch, my friends who had previously distanced themselves approached me and began chatting. We spoke for a while, and they inquired about my husband. I informed them that he was fine, and they seemed surprised. They asked me if we were still together, and I asked them what they meant by that. They said nothing and that they were just genuinely asking. I felt like that was a bit weird, but I didn't think much of it. Work finished up as usual, I clocked off and went home. We got ready for dinner, and then we went out. We got to the restaurant, ordered our food, and it was a little awkward between us at first. But we soon eased into conversation and started talking more freely. We talked about how we had been so busy these past few weeks and how we had been distant with each other. We chatted about a lot of subjects, and then at one point, my husband asked me if I had anything to tell him. Looking back now, I realized that was his way of giving me a chance to come clean. But at that moment, I didn't have the courage. I hesitated, then told him no, I had nothing to tell him. He seemed fine with it, a little surprised and hurt perhaps, but we continued on with our dinner. We paid the bill, left a generous tip, and then headed home. However, when we got into the car to drive back home, my husband reached into a compartment in the car and brought out some papers. He handed them to me, and when I looked at them, I realized they were divorce papers. My heart sank, and I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. I was horrified, and my hand started trembling as I stared at the divorce papers in disbelief. Why was this happening? The only thing that came to me was the fact that I cheated, but how would he have found out? As I looked at my husband, his once cheerful expression was now replaced by a mix of hurt and betrayal. I knew he'd discovered my secret, he had found out about my infidelity, and he was crushed. He said he couldn't understand how I could betray him like that, how I could throw away everything we had built together. He explained that he had a video, and my heart sank as he played it on his phone. There, clear as day, was footage of me kissing the stranger from the bar. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My friends had betrayed me. Those same friends who had seemed so supportive and curious about my night out had recorded my indiscretion and sent it to my husband. I then understood why they approached me during lunch. I couldn't comprehend their betrayal. Why would they do this to me? When did they even record me? I wasn't so inebriated that night as to not be able to pay attention to my surroundings. So how had my friends been able to record me without me knowing that I'd been that distracted? My husband then confirmed that they had sent it to him that very night, and he had been giving me a chance to confess. He said he waited and gave me time, but I just clammed up and never admitted it. He said he had decided to end our marriage. I felt numb, the weight of my actions crashing down on me. I had ruined my marriage and hurt the person I adored the most, all for a fleeting moment of excitement. My husband said that he was angry, he was betrayed, but that one thing he was not was cruel. He told me that he would give me 10 minutes to get my things out of his house. He said that he had sent a message to my brother before we went out for dinner to come over and help me get my things, and that he had already sent over the video to my parents and siblings and explained everything. He said that my brother would most likely have already been waiting for us at the house, or would arrive in a matter of minutes by the time we would reach the house. It was as if everything was a joke, it was as if everything was just glossing over me. I didn't even know how to react. I cried and begged, but my husband wouldn't even bother listening to me. He just told me to be quiet and let him drive. When we got to the house, he told me that my 10 minutes started now. My brother hadn't arrived yet, so he said he would send a text to my brother to confirm where he was, and that in the meantime, I could arrange my stuff and put them out on the porch. He was quite serious about this, and I knew there would be no talking to him now or trying to convince him to not kick me out. On checking my phone, I realized that my parents and even my siblings had all sent me messages ranging from "what the heck" to "I'm very disappointed in you." They were all horrified and disappointed. My parents told me to not even dare bug my husband and to just pack my stuff and come back to the house, that they would help me talk to my husband. That actually made me feel a little relieved. I packed and arranged my stuff on the porch, and in a matter of minutes, my brother was there. My husband didn't even bother coming out, he just shut the door in my face. I had to go back to my parents' house with my brother. Staying at my parents' house was challenging. They tried their best to be supportive, as did my siblings, despite their outrage at what I had done. They advised me to allow my husband time to cool down, implying that he could take me back because I had never cheated on him before. Commuting from my parents' house to work became my new norm because my husband refused to let me drive the car when I left his house. He had purchased the car, so I understood his decision. Furthermore, he had emptied our joint account, leaving me with little to nothing. While the money was his, this unexpected loss of financial independence hurt me hard, showing how much I relied on him. Unfortunately, bad news travels faster than good news, and everyone at work quickly learned that my husband had kicked me out of the house. It was at this point that I realized the true nature of my so-called buddies. They were cruel, mocking my circumstances with oblique remarks that made an already difficult situation even worse. I resigned from my work about a week after returning to live with my folks. Before leaving, however, I reported the problem to the Human Resources Office, HRO. I didn't have high hopes that they would intervene because everything transpired outside of work hours, and the comments my friends made were indirect. But I felt compelled to speak out before departing. To my amazement, my supervisor understood my circumstance. Instead of the normal 2 weeks' notice, he let me depart immediately. This act of empathy offered a small comfort during this difficult time. Now back at my parents' house without a job, I felt a strong sense of loss and unease. At times, I worried about falling into depression. My spouse made sure I didn't forget to take the divorce papers, but I refused to sign them. My folks told me to hold off since my hubby might rethink. Despite his quiet, I had hoped that we could work things out, seeking a fresh start. I started looking for remote job alternatives. The thought of working from home appealed to me because I was tired of socializing after my so-called pals betrayed me. I wish I hadn't gone out with them that fateful night. Maybe none of this would have occurred. During this time, my mother-in-law contacted me. She was quite disappointed in what I had done, but I was desperate, so I lied to her, telling her that I was intoxicated at the time and would not have cheated if I had been sober. She appeared to understand and promised to help me talk to my spouse, which gave me hope. I hoped that the pressure from my husband's mother and my own parents would persuade him to reconsider. A few weeks later, my parents felt it was time to act. My mother-in-law couldn't come, but she promised to contact my husband and tried to persuade him to forgive me. We went to my husband's residence to discuss things out. He hadn't communicated with any of us and had really blocked us. But we relied on the fact that he was a coder, so we mostly worked from home. Fortunately, he was there and allowed us in. He offered us drinks, which seemed like a promising start, but he was still unwilling to reconcile. My parents tried to talk to him about forgiveness and how my actions were wrong. He listened but made it apparent that he was not thinking about forgiving me. He added that even if he forgives me, he will never forget what happened, and that it might be best for us to part ways. He maintained that signing the divorce papers would make things easier for both of us. He told me that no matter how I felt, infidelity was unacceptable, and every action had consequences. I was devastated. I began crying, hoping that my cries might move him, but he seemed unimpressed. He was disappointed that I had involved his mother and said it made him rethink his connection with her. He also pointed out that I wasn't so inebriated that I didn't realize what I was doing and that it was irresponsible of me not to see my buddies filming the situation before we departed. He stressed that signing the divorce papers was the best way for both of us to go forward. It was a moment of clarity and a wake-up call for me, a revelation that hit me like a ton of bricks. I needed to let William go. I'd caused him much sorrow, and there was no way to repair what I had done. The only way forward was to sign those divorce papers and face the repercussions of my conduct. As I prepared to leave with my parents, I found the resolve to apologize to William. I assured him I'd sign the papers and send them over. His amazement at my abrupt shift of attitude was evident, but his demeanor, however, conveyed a sense of relief. He thanked me, and as I walked away, I felt a weight lifted off my shoulders. When I returned home, I realized I needed to face the truth of the issue. William was not going to take me back, and clinging to false hope would just exacerbate our suffering. I told my parents that it was time to let him leave. Delaying the process would be a waste of everyone's time. William had always been a devoted and loving partner, but he could be extremely unyielding, especially on matters of principle. I understood that once he made up his mind, there was no turning back. So I decided to sign the divorce papers and bring them to him personally. Standing on his porch, I felt a mixture of emotions, regret, despair, and a strange sense of acceptance. I handed him the paperwork, thanked him for everything, and apologized again. There were no tears or pleading. I knew it was finished, and I needed to accept it. Now I'm waiting for the court date, knowing that the prospects of a positive outcome are minimal. The video evidence of my infidelity is damning, and my lawyer brother has informed me that my case is not strong. My brother cannot represent me due to a conflict of interest, and he doesn't specialize in divorce. Nonetheless, I am pleased that William is divorced. Whereas Christy was the life of the party, no matter where she went, she was full of energy and could always captivate the audience in a matter of minutes. Despite having contrasting personalities, we linked immediately and became friends from the start of college. She never left me alone and accompanied me to the majority of the activities with her. Because of her, I became more social. I was still not a particularly outgoing person, but it was an improvement over my old self. I met Trevor at one of these parties. I was there with Christy, who introduced me to her classmates, Trevor and Dan. Truthfully, I didn't notice Trevor at first. My entire attention was directed toward Dan. Dan was exactly my type, but somewhat quiet, tall, and gorgeous. We talked for a long time at the party, and I believed we had a genuine connection. We truly understood one another and spoke as if we had known each other forever. That night, as I lay in bed, I was ecstatic, thinking that I had finally discovered a romantic connection. I was pretty confident he'd ask me out sooner than later. We had tremendous chemistry at the party, and I'm very sure he felt it as well. I had many assignments all week, so I didn't follow Christy anywhere, unlike her. I wanted academic confirmation. It was finally Saturday when I finished all of my homework and assumed I'd see Dan again. When I returned to the room, Christy was already preparing for a party near campus. She asked me which costume was the greatest, and I helped her choose. She informed me she was very happy since her crush was coming to the party. I couldn't stop smiling because I was very confident Dan was also attending the party. I told her mine, and we both left. We didn't discuss who our crush was and decided to introduce ourselves at the party. She helped me get dressed in an extremely lovely attire. We were both suited up, and after taking a few selfies, we headed to the party. Christy informed me that she would go find her crush and then bring him to me so that we could meet. She left, and I continued looking for Dan. I was pretty sure he would be at this party, but I couldn't find him. After half an hour, Christy returned to me with her crush. I was quite thrilled for my pal, but then I had the shock of my life when she returned with Dan. Dan was her crush. I thought we had a genuine connection, but I was mistaken. It was clear that Christy's feelings for him were reciprocated. He kept looking at her as if she were the only girl in the room. She inquired about my boyfriend's whereabouts, and I couldn't tell Christy we both had crushes on the same guy. I was not the type of girl who would argue with her friend about a guy, so I just shrugged and told her that he hadn't arrived. It was unnecessary because Dan and I had already been introduced. We talked for a while, then I excused myself and went to get a drink. It was then that I met Trevor. I'd already let go of Dan, we didn't have much going on anyway. Trevor was nice and friendly to me. We talked a lot that night, and I had a few drinks, so he offered to drop me back to my dorm. Christy had already left with Dan. I felt foolish for believing that Dan was interested in me. He was simply speaking to me out of politeness because he was interested in my best friend. I didn't want to feel foolish, so I simply decided to forget about him and move on. Trevor was very nice to me when he dropped me off at my dorm. I said thank you and kissed him on the cheek. He asked for my phone number, and we began texting after that. We texted a lot after that and eventually got into a relationship after a few dates. While this was going on in my life, Christy and Dan became romantically involved. On several occasions, Christy suggested a double date, but I wasn't interested. I did not think meeting Dan was a good idea, but Christy was adamant about it. We finally went on the double date, despite my happiness with Trevor. I couldn't shake my feelings for Dan. I still felt attracted to him. If he asked me a question, I would become shy. I did not like feeling that way. Who the hell is crushing on their best friend's boyfriend? I started to avoid Christy and Dan. Trevor did not seem to mind at all. Even though Christy and I remained friends, we were not inseparable. Time passed, and we all finished college. I had forgotten about Dan and was content in life with Trevor. We loved each other, and he made me happy. When he asked me to marry him, it happened in an instant. Yes, life was going fairly well. Our marriage was blissful until it all fell apart. After college, Christy and Dan both got good corporate jobs. They got married soon after us, and we even went to their wedding. The crush I had on Dan seemed silly. I still found him good-looking, but the crush felt so ancient. I moved on from it. After college, everyone got busy in their life, and we rarely met. But around a year ago, everything changed. Me and Trevor got into a huge fight. It wasn't like we didn't fight, we used to have our disagreements, but this fight was like nothing like the fights we used to have. What really happened was I felt that my husband was hiding something from me. His behavior changed, he started coming home really late and started taking calls where I couldn't hear him. It was very different from his usual behavior. I felt it was really shady that my husband was hiding something from me. This continued on for weeks, but one day when I finally had enough of this, I confronted him and asked him what the hell was going on. He acted as if I was overreacting and that there were no changes in his behavior. This annoyed me even more. I told him to cut the nonsense and be honest with me. He straight up denied everything and told me that I was making a fuss out of nothing. We kept screaming at each other. I told him that if he was cheating on me, he should tell me. Clearly, he got mad that I thought so low of him. When I asked him to see his phone, he kept on saying that he cannot give it to me. I was so sure that he was cheating on me. I even told him that he should leave me if he has to cheat on me. We both were really mad at each other. It was the biggest fight of our relationship. I couldn't stay in the same place as him, so I went out. I needed a drink, so I visited this bar. I just wanted a drink, a martini, and swallow all my hurt and anger, but it turned out the universe had plans for me. While I was having my drink in silence, I heard someone calling my name. This guy came to my side and just stood there. When I looked up at him, it was none other than Dan. Yeah. It was the same guy from college. He was surprised to see me there. He asked me what I'm doing at a bar so late at night. I told him I just needed a drink. He wanted to know where Trevor was. I told him we got in a fight. I was already a touch tipsy by then, so when he mentioned Trevor, I got a little emotional and had tears in my eyes. Dan didn't fail to notice that. He sat down by my side and started talking to me. He was trying to comfort me with random conversation and lame jokes, and I was grateful for that. I got more drunk while talking to him. We talked for a good time. I asked him what's going on with him. He explained that he had arrived at the bar with a client and was about to leave when he noticed me. I asked him where Christy was. He told me that she is out of town for work and wouldn't be back in town for quite a few days. I listened to him talking and laughing, and it felt like my crush was coming to life again. He was just so lovely. I might have been a touch too inebriated because I lost all my filters. We were chatting about college parties when he suggested something. We also met at one of these parties. I told him I remembered having a crush on him that day. When I said that, he almost spilled his drink. I realized what I had said, but it was too late to retract it. It took him a moment to absorb everything. He then startled me even more by admitting that he too had a crush on me. He informed me that he genuinely loved me and was smitten with me at the party. I could not believe him. This guy, like myself, had potential. The next thing I knew, I wasn't in my seat anymore, and we were kissing each other. I can't recall who started it, but we kissed passionately as if it was a once-in-a-lifetime occasion. Dan escorted me to his car, where we hooked up. It seemed as if the entire universe revolved around us. I enjoyed feeling that way. I used to think a lot about him, and now I'm with him. It appeared to be true. I had forgotten everything at that point. I had forgotten that I was married, someone's wife. After we finished the act, Dan asked if I wanted to join him at his residence. I almost answered yes, but then realized that my husband was at home waiting for me. I told him I had to go home. He nodded in agreement and dropped me off at home. I arrived home late at night and discovered Trevor sleeping in the bedroom. I was relieved he was already asleep since I had no idea what I would have told him if he had been awake. I took a shower and fell asleep as well. I didn't want him to smell a man's cologne on me. In the morning, I was still not completely sober, so I went to sleep. It wasn't until I awoke in the morning with a killer hangover that I remembered what had transpired the night before. I couldn't believe it. I had hooked up with someone else while I was married. I felt like throwing up, especially because that someone else was my friend's husband. I was very upset with myself for doing what I did, but what had been done was irreversible, and I could not undo it. All I could do was forget it and never recall it again. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen for some water since I had a severe headache. Trevor was sitting on a stool when I entered the kitchen. He inquired as to where I had been the previous night, still angry about the quarrel we had the day before. I merely gave him a vague response about needing fresh air. I wasn't sure if he believed my excuse, but he didn't pursue it, which made me quite grateful. I had a severe headache and couldn't deal with Trevor's questions. Later that day, I received an SMS from an unknown number. I opened it, and it was from Dan. He texted me and said he couldn't forget last night. It wasn't signed, but it was evident who it was, Dan. Who else would text me? Even though I couldn't forget that night and didn't want to think about it, I did not want to destroy my home due to temptation. I decided to cut to the chase and text Trevor that we should forget about it and pretend it never occurred. Dan texted me back that it was impossible for him to pretend that he didn't want to spend more time with me. I kept assuring him that it couldn't happen again. He began calling me after that. Fortunately, Trevor was not home at the time. I took up the phone and decided to tell him to forget everything, but Dan had the same thought. He began explaining how life was providing us another chance to discover who we could have been those years ago. He stated what transpired between us was magical, and we needed to explore it further. I'm ashamed to say that everything he said was so appealing that I was persuaded. I warned him that if we did this, we had to make sure it didn't reach anyone. I did not want our husbands to know about this. Dan consented quickly, stating that he does not want Christy or Trevor to know this and that it would be just our secret. Dan said he would send me the location where we were going to meet the next day. The next day, after Trevor had left for the office, I dressed and left for the area he had assigned me. It was a good place, on the far edges of the city where nobody came, which I was grateful for. I parked my automobile beside Dan's truck, and I then joined him in his truck. He kissed me immediately, and soon we were making out. Making out with Dan was so much joy, it seemed as if the entire world blurred out, leaving only us. And this is how my relationship with Dan began. He used to choose random areas where there was almost no chance that anyone would notice us. We didn't get a hotel room or anything because there was no proof of us being together anywhere. Christy returned to town after her work trip, and Dan stated that he was being careful and that no one would ever find out. He used to schedule our meetings when Trevor and Christy were both busy in their offices. I had assumed that we would just keep doing this until we got it out of our system and then forget about everything, but this was easier said than done. Every time I considered ending this, Dan would just explain that he needed a little more time and give me a kiss, making me feel as if I needed more time too. We gave ourselves a 6-month deadline, resolving to undertake all of this in 6 months or perhaps sooner, as Trevor and I had grown apart following that disagreement. Part of the reason was that I felt bad in front of him, but that fight had built a significant gulf between us. I suspected it was another lady, but I was also connected with another man, so I stopped asking about what he was doing. We merely kept our distance. It was such a contrast to how we had been early in our marriage. Trevor once told me that he was leaving town for job reasons. This offered me another thought. I was bored of meeting Dan only in his truck. I needed more time with him and to be somewhere other than a vehicle. When I told him this, he initially disagreed, claiming there was a lot of risk. But after some coaxing, he agreed that when Trevor left in the morning, I would invite Dan over. I'd turned off the security cameras installed outside our home. It was all clear. Dan stopped over shortly after Christy left for work. I escorted Dan to the guest room. I was thrilled to have him there. We connected, and Dan left shortly after Trevor had been gone for 2 days. So the next morning, I persisted with Dan. He comes over again. He was apprehensive about us being caught but consented. He came over, and we went to the guest room. I was so engrossed in the moment that I didn't notice when the front door opened. Dan was on top of me when the guest room door opened, and Trevor walked in on us. As soon as the door opened, we froze. Trevor was not meant to return home until the next day. I was astonished to see him there, and he was equally as surprised, perhaps even more. Before I could say anything, he slammed the door and walked out. Dan quickly rolled off of me, and I got dressed and ran after Trevor. He wasn't in the living room. I went outside to check for him, but his car was also not present. Dan came out as well. We'd both damaged our homes. We said nothing to each other, and then he simply left, presumably going to Christy to ensure Trevor did not reach her before him. I kept contacting Trevor because I was worried he wouldn't do anything rash. He had always had a temper, and I did not want him to act irrationally. He didn't answer my call. Dan called later to inform me Trevor had called Christy, and she was now furious with him. He stated we couldn't talk again, and I immediately hung up on him, knowing what he said. I continued waiting for Trevor to return home, but he did not. The entire day went like this. I even invited his pals into his office, but nobody knew where he was. I fell asleep on the couch as I waited. Trevor returned home at around midnight, furious as hell. When I tried to get near him, he simply pushed me away. I started to say something, but he instructed me to keep it shut. He said he'd seen enough, and there's nothing I could say to him that would make things better. To be honest, I could understand why he was angry. It was entirely justified. But I didn't want it to end our marriage. I know that was incredibly selfish of me, but I couldn't see my house being destroyed like that. I kept reminding Trevor that it was only a temptation and signified nothing else. I tried to reason with him, how it was only physical, there was no emotional involvement. It was the incorrect thing to say because when I said it, he became even angrier. He tossed away the vase which remained on the table and told me to leave his house. By the next morning, I informed him that he couldn't kick me out of the house. We'd built the house jointly. I had designed everything myself. We have numerous memories here. But he merely chuckled and stated that if I didn't, I'd face far worse punishments. He stated that before storming into the bedroom. I sat in the living room, head in my hands. I eventually realized I had damaged my life. I ruined my lovely marriage just because of a meaningless affair. I felt that I deserved one more chance, one minor error cannot bring an end to all of my years with Trevor. I hoped that his rage would subside overnight, and then in the morning, I can try to persuade him to give me one more chance. I resolved to put all of my focus into Trevor. He decided to give me one more chance. I chose not to leave the house as he had requested, but rather to stay and try to talk to him. The next morning, when Trevor awoke and discovered me below, he became enraged. He questioned in a nasty tone what I was still doing here. I told him we needed to discuss, but he simply replied I should have talked to him before going to bed with another man. I told him to listen to me just once, but he wasn't interested. He was yelling about how I had betrayed him. This also applies to his pal. He even abused Dan, saying that we were both disgusting as humans. He wondered how I could do that to him. I had no answer to his query, so I just stood there, head down. He stared at me with disdain in his eyes and informed me that he had come home earlier because he wanted to spend quality time with me but had no idea I was such a bad person. Nonetheless, he instructed me to leave his apartment as quickly as possible and never to return. He brought my suitcase and asked me to leave. I felt guilty and embarrassed that I was being thrown off like that. I felt ashamed enough to realize it was better if I left right then. I hoped that spending time away would give him perspective and allow him to forgive me. I left the house to be with my sister in the same town. She was quite upset with me for cheating on my husband, but as my only sibling, she had to come to my rescue. I decided to stay at her apartment for a few days before returning to Trevor or finding another place to reside. I kept texting Trevor, hoping for a response, but I didn't hear anything from him. He used to see my texts, but never responded. A few days went by like this, and I was already a wreck. I missed Trevor, and my thoughts kept returning to the moments when we were united and happy. It felt like so long ago. I honestly regretted what I'd done. I believed I was at the lowest point in my life. I had lost both my husband and my home. I didn't think anything could have gone worse, but I was proven incorrect. It had been 2 weeks since I had visited a coffee shop to grab a coffee. I was sitting at the coffee shop when a strange man approached and sat in front of me. I was taken aback when he addressed me by name and greeted me. He smiled at me, which freaked me out. I asked how he knew me, and he did not respond to my question. He informed me he works at a bank I'd never heard of. Yes, he said, they had been attempting to reach me for a week, but I never responded. I didn't understand why they wanted to contact me. I did not have a bank account in their name. I asked what he wanted to talk about. He took out an envelope and said he wanted to present it to me. He stated that they went to the address I mentioned, but were informed that I no longer lived there. I wasn't sure what this guy was talking about. I opened the envelope and discovered a credit card bill with my name on it. It mentioned so many expenses that I got whiplash. The whole amount was $50,000. I informed this guy that it was a mistake and that they needed to look for someone else because it couldn't be me. I informed him that I did not have a bank account with their bank. He glanced at me as if I were joking, saying he wasn't incorrect and provided me my bank information. There was an account in my name that included all of my IDs. I didn't bring my IDs, which were left at home with Trevor. The bank employee went on to say that they would have emailed or texted me, but the email address was no longer in use, and the phone number provided was also out of service. Everything that was going on was beyond my comprehension. How could I accumulate a $50,000 debt without ever spending anything? I informed him that I would get back to him. He informed me I had a month to pay the full sum. He only wanted to deliver the bill in person. I knew I wanted answers, and Trevor was the only person who could provide them. I hired a taxi and headed to our residence. Trevor wasn't there and the main gate was locked. I needed to find him somehow, so I went into his office, but he wasn't even present. I asked everyone where he was, and no one knew. I repeatedly called Trevor, but he did not answer. It was almost evening, so I returned to my sister's apartment. I got out my laptop to learn more about the bank. It turned out to be one of those banks where you can quickly open an account with simple paperwork. I reviewed their regulations and discovered that, like other banks, they were extremely stringent about debt. They did not even have an installment system. It meant that I had to deposit the entire money in one go and within 1 month. Trevor needed to explain this to me. I kept contacting him and left text messages, but all I received was silence. I planned to visit the house the next day early in the morning before Trevor left. I didn't have that much money with me. How the hell was I meant to pay this much? The next morning, when I departed for home, Trevor was the only person in the house. I asked him what the hell was going on. He inquired why I came back here. I told him to first explain why there was a $50,000 debt in my name, and that was from a bank whose name I had never heard of. When he heard this, he finally grinned as if he had received something he desired. He stated that it took them a long time to figure out my whereabouts. I gazed at him in confusion. He simply shrugged and began lecturing me that I should be more careful. Identity theft is becoming more severe these days. I told him not to feed me this nonsense. All of my IDs and paperwork were kept here. How might somebody use them to open a bank account in my name? He laughed and replied, "Maybe I gave it to them." I was astounded to hear this. My husband had revealed my identification to crooks. I questioned him why he would do that and how come you knew individuals like that. He claimed I was forgetting that he operates a security company and therefore knows a wide range of people. Yeah, he said, if I remembered when I was doubting him and suspecting he was having an affair since he was usually on the phone or in his office, it was because he was chasing down a group of cybercriminals who were stealing people's ideas and committing financial theft alongside them. I was still absorbing everything when Trevor told me that when he saw me with Dan, he decided he wanted to see me suffer. So he phoned them and handed over all of my IDs. I asked him what he expected out of this. Why was he acting like this? He became enraged as he remembered something and said that I deceived him and violated his trust. He claimed that I deserved it because I had damaged him so badly. He kept telling me that he intended to provide me with a luxurious lifestyle, but I gave up all for such a pointless affair. I couldn't stop crying because his voice was filled with wrath and sadness. He told me not to squander my crocodile tears. It does nothing for him. He told me I should go and never try to contact him again. I was barely leaving the house when he advised me to keep checking my bank statements. I felt that was a pretty specific and strange thing to say. As soon as I left the house, I opened my phone to check the balance of my personal account. This was my personal account, and all of the money I earned through freelancing was credited to it. I didn't check my bank balance on a daily basis, but I figured there should be a significant sum in this account. Imagine my horror when I discovered that my bank account was in the negative. I investigated the transactions and discovered that someone had withdrawn the entire balance from the account using my credentials. I was so upset and angry that I burst into tears right there when Trevor pushed me out of the house. I didn't expect anything worse to happen, but this was beyond my imagination. In a matter of days, I had lost my marriage, been homeless, and was now broke with a $50,000 debt. I could not stop crying. I had no idea what I was going to do. I somehow controlled myself and returned to my sister's house. She became concerned when she saw me with puffy eyes. I told her everything. She explained that we may register a complaint, but I told her it would do us no good. These are extremely skilled cybercriminals. They had thoroughly buried their tracks, and there was nothing we could do anymore. She called me down and said we'll figure it out. I just cried in her arms. A couple of days went along like this. After that day when Trevor apprehended us, I had not heard from Dan or Christy. I wouldn't have called him, but I was desperate for help and hoped to get a loan from him. When I called him, he answered, but his tone was radically different than it had been with me before. He asked me very harshly why I had called him. I was taken aback by his tone, but I still informed him that I needed his assistance. He said he couldn't do anything, he had finally persuaded them to give him another chance. She'd forgiven him, but if she found out he had spoken with me, she would lose her mind. She told me not to call him again or he would block me, and the guy who persuaded me to have an affair with me said he was going to block my number. I was officially at rock bottom. There was no one who would help me. I made the decision to take whatever work I could. If that wasn't enough, Trevor also sent me divorce papers. His lawyer said I could contact my lawyer, but I didn't have the money to hire one and then seek alimony. I didn't have the energy for that, so I simply signed wherever they requested. They said they would contact me as needed. So that's it, guys. That's a summary of everything that has happened in the past few days. Since having a sweet and perfect wedding life, I ended up homeless and had a broken life. Karma is definitely real, it got me back for my affair with Dan. Even though I'm really hurt with what Trevor had done with me, I couldn't fault him when he loved me. He loved me with everything, so how could I expect him to take his retribution half-heartedly? He wasn't that type of guy to do things half-heartedly. Currently, I'm working non-stop at writing for small companies. It's nearly not enough for what I need right now, but it's still better than nothing. I'm still crashing at my sister's place. It was a good thing that she lived alone, otherwise, I didn't know what I was going to do. Currently, I have no idea what is going to happen, so I'm just figuring out one day at a time. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.